Welcome back to episode 4 of the Existential Lounge. Today we're going to be talking about Stoicism, which is the discipline of aligning thoughts with logic so to reduce unnecessary suffering.
Right. So it's just the idea that we want to reduce the things that make us feel bad when they're just not necessary. Suffering is not a bad thing in and of itself, but unproductive suffering can be. And this is the practice of limiting that.
Definitely. And we can recognize when suffering has become unproductive when it is found or experienced in excess. So if you find yourself in a certain thought process, or if you're just nervous or anxious about something, that recognize when it's important to feel what you're feeling, but also recognize when you are being crumbled by it and when you're kind of this slave to this emotion and it's taking you where it will.
And also recognize what is the end of the suffering. What is the point? Why is this happening? Is there something fruitful at the end of this road, or am I suffering for the sake of suffering? And discerning between those two is super important.
Definitely.
It all started during antiquity with Zeno around 300 BCE. After that, it moves on to Seneca and Epictetus, and eventually comes to Marcus Aurelius, who seems to be most people's um, face of Stoicism.
Yeah, he was the Roman emperor.
End of Pax Romana.
Yeah, at one point in time, the most powerful man on earth. And he wrote Meditations, which has, in the most profound ways, spread ideas of Stoicism, what we're talking about today, and allowing it to be more popularized. And it was his journal. He had no intention of having this published. This was his personal journal of ideas that he would think about to himself on how to be a better person, how to rule, how to be a grounded human, and how to live well. And this revolutionized the way many people of even today live, as it's been passed down from generations.
Yeah, his initial intention was to have it be a book that he would pass to his son Commodus so that he may become a good ruler as well. That didn't turn out as his plan, but uh, it's definitely helped hundreds of thousands, not millions of people after that. So, regardless of him maybe not wanting it to have been this public thing, it has served a great thing. Um, I think, like I pointed out earlier, it's important to note that he is considered the last of the good emperors during the period of Pax Romana, and in large part that is due to the principles that he instilled in the Roman Empire that aligned with his teachings and led to some of the most prosperous times during Roman history, regardless of, say, the Antonine Plague, which was going on at the time, the various wars that were going on at the time. He had Rome still prospering.
Definitely. And there are 4 pillars of Stoicism that we're going to be touching on today, which have to do with wisdom, temperance, justice, and courage. All of those are found to be highly important into living well and living a meaningful life. And we're going to dive into quotes pertaining to each of these pillars and explain how in our own personal lives, how they've been practical to us.
Right. Just look at these quotes and try to deconstruct them from the more classical speak to something that's more digestible for the average person. So, the first branch that we're looking at here, the first pillar, is wisdom. Wisdom, as defined by the Stoics, is the ability by which itself is productive of human happiness, the knowledge of what is good and bad, the disposition by which we judge what is to be done and what is not to be done. So essentially, it's the knowledge we've gained which helps us make ethical and justified decisions going forward.
So another way we can look at wisdom is knowing what to apply and when. It's kind of a funny thing to like define because it's similar to knowledge, but it's the practical application of particular knowledge that makes it useful. So that could be like another way of looking at it.
Right. We know a billion different things, but different situations will call for different parts of things that we know. So it's the ability to go into that bank of things that we know and pull out the thing that is most applicable to the situation at hand.
So there's a little saying regarding wisdom, and it's knowledge is knowing a tomato is a fruit, wisdom is knowing not to put it in a fruit salad. So there are just so many examples of in life that we can have particular knowledge, but the ideas of knowing when to apply particular things is what's going to make all the difference at the end of the day.
It's essentially just situational awareness, knowing what to do when. The first quote we're going to go into as it pertains to wisdom is by the philosopher Epictetus. He says, "That is why the philosophers warn us not to be satisfied with mere learning, but to add practice and then training. For as time passes, we forget what we learned and end up doing the opposite and hold opinions the opposite of which we should."
So much like philosophy, Stoicism is about about applying things regularly. It's about becoming, embodying this idea and allowing it to become parts of like what inspires and what motivates and deeply influences everything that we do. And we have to consistently do these things, or else we'll become rusty and it won't become natural. And a huge
Right.
part of Stoicism isn't about actively trying to be this thing. We regularly practice it. We regularly practice particular ideas so that they become like helping the person across the street becomes as natural as taking your next breath.
Exactly.
You don't think to go to do it, but you practice this so much that it becomes an automatic response into how
Exactly.
you operate.
Once you do this enough, Stoicism shouldn't be something you're trying to do. Stoicism just should be your response to situations, not I have to remind myself to think of this way because that is Stoic teaching. It's just this happens, automatically your brain applies it. However, that's considered the optimal. That's considered the perfect Stoic, which nobody is. Nobody's ever going to be. So there's going to be situations where you have to remind yourself, but more so, this is speaking to the everyday things. I think in multiple episodes now, I've used the example of someone cutting you off in traffic. Those are the situations where Stoicism should just flow in. Those are the situations where we don't have to remind ourselves not to be mad at the other driver, but just not be mad at the other driver.
I agree with that. So, to read another quote by Epictetus, if anyone tells you that a certain person speaks ill of you, do not make excuses of what it is said of you, but answer, he was ignorant of my other faults, else he would have not mentioned these alone. So, I think that resonates really well with being in the wisdom category because we have to reflect that like we are all super flawed beings. And I think it's everyone would agree to say that it's so exhausting and that we have this pressure to act as though we don't
Mm.
and operate within our daily lives like we can't make mistakes or something of the nature.
Right.
I think that recognizing that we have to have grace with ourselves and know that if someone speaks ill of me, people are going to have perspectives, people are going to have opinions, and we can't control those opinions. And recognize that if someone points out a flaw, yeah, we do. We have them. Exactly. And I think being acceptant with ourselves that we have flaws and okay with the fact that people in the world are going to see them because that's just human. That's just what we are. Exactly. You're just seeing a part of ourselves in reality that, like, I mean, we're just a work in progress. We are always a work in progress. And those little elements to ourselves that are going to be seen as these flaws, that it's inevitable. And we might as well embrace them. And I think that the ability to learn how to embrace them is part of the wisdom here. It's knowing that I have tons of flaws and that's okay. I'm going to accept it, recognizing people are going to see it. And wisdom is the ability here to not be upset when someone else recognizes it, but observe that, hey, them recognizing was actually inevitable. And I might as well be okay with that.
Yeah, and this is just reflective of a very basic Stoic practice of reframing your view, your perspective of situations. When someone tells you that someone has said something that might be perceived negatively about you, you have a choice there. You can choose to be offended by this opinion that someone held of you, but in this situation here, Epictetus is saying, reframe your thought. Don't be offended. Say, yes, that is true. And honestly, there's more. There's more things that are flawed with me. As Brandon was saying, we're all flawed and none of us are ever going to be perfect. So someone else recognizing one of these flaws is just part of the human experience. So the next pillar that we're going to be going into here is temperance. Temperance, as defined by the Stoics, is moderation of the soul concerning the desire and pleasures that normally occur in it. Good discipline in the soul, the state by which its possessor chooses and is cautious about what he should.
Another great way to look at temperance is discipline, right? Recognize when we are being excessive with what we're indulging within, and not getting lost in that. It's very easy with binge watching things. I think especially nowadays when we have a surplus of good food around us, or
Entertainment.
entertainment, yeah, and novelty, all these things that we could just really, really lose ourselves in. Recognize when you have when you've reached a threshold of excess,
Yes.
and that's going to also like have to do a lot with wisdom as well to be able to determine when you've reached excess. But temperance is recognizing, or excuse me, exercising the ability to dial back a bit when you've gone too far.
Yeah, I think a good dichotomy between wisdom and temperance is that temperance is the ability to put wisdom into action. So now that we've defined it, we're going to go into one of the first quotes here, which is one of my personal favorites, where Seneca says, "You act like mortals in all that you fear, and like immortals in all which you desire." So here he's essentially saying that we act as if the things we fear are imminent. They are here now and not a thing to come. We act as if we need to take action against fear at this very moment. A lot of people experience the fear of death, and um, death is, to go into Seneca's ideas here as well. He says how death is something we cannot fear because while we're alive, we're not experiencing death. And when we're dead, we're no longer alive to fear anything. So holding that fear of death is irrational, and to act within your day-to-day life like death is here is something you need to take imminent action against. You've defeated the purpose of what it is to act with temperance. And then on the flip side of that, he says, "You act immortal in all which you desire." So the things we desire, the dreams we hold, anything that we want to do. I want to buy a house. I want to start a business. I want anything. We act as if we're immortal, as if time is endless, as if we have an infinite amount of time to reach those things which we desire. While we're over here putting imminent action to the things we fear, which aren't coming until it doesn't matter, we put action aside for the things which we desire until we run out of time, making believe that that we're immortal in this effort to reach what we desire. I think a really good example for that one is how long Brandon and I have talked about starting this. We have known each other for years and have said we need to start this podcast thing. We think it's something we can do well. And how long did we put that off? How
Years.
long did we continue to say we'll do it another time? We'll start it when we have this, when we have that. We start putting conditions on when it's okay to start reaching for the things which we desire. Again, in Seneca's words, we act like we're immortal. We act like there's no time limit on reaching these desires.
So I'm going to paraphrase a bit, but there's a Marcus quote that I just thought of where he brings about that, like the great things that you want to go do, right? You want to go travel, you want to like backpack, you want to like, do all these great things, run a marathon or whatever it may be, that your mental faculties are going to be withering. Your physical capabilities are going to be reduced in time. Seize the day now.
Yes.
Like if you're not jumping on the opportunities to go do these great things that you want to do, your capacity to do them, not only just do them, but do them well, is going to be diminished in time. And that we have this precious ability, with us, and it's constantly fleeting, and we have to take advantage of it while we have it, because there is inevitably a time when we won't be able to do it anymore.
Exactly. All of our abilities are dwindling before us. Every day we become less able to do something we did before. Our minds become less sharp by the minute, and eventually what we desire is no longer achievable because our physical capabilities have reached their point of not being able to do this anymore. To go on your seize the day thing, it just reminds me, or not reminds me, it's literally carpe diem. It's that seize the day, memento mori. Remember that we will die. Always remember that our time here is finite. Whatever you desire, get on it. Get on it. Even if you fail, you tried, and that's better than on your deathbed having this sense of, I should have tried that.
Definitely. And I'm glad you brought up memento mori, because I think in culture, a lot of the times to talk about death, like in social circles, is like it's almost, you cower from it. It's like, well, this is dark. Let's not talk about this. But Stoicism evokes this feeling of it's trying to evoke greatness from you in contemplation of death. Stoicism begs you to consistently think
Right.
about death, because it is the greatest motivator that exists. That whatever it is that you want to do and become and achieve, that there is a invisible clock above your head, and that you have no idea when that thing's going to empty. And to think about it frequently, it's something that it's just such a great motivator. And if you change the perspective of it, rather than looking at it as some dark thing, recognize that like it is only because of death that anything in life has value, and that achieving anything
Right.
means things. It gives
So
value to our life.
I think, again, to go back with Seneca and his view on death, how he says we can't fear death because when we're dead, we're no longer alive. So a lot of people's fear of death seems to be that they are fearful of the experience of death, which makes no sense because we're not there to experience anything anymore. By definition, when you're dead, you're gone. There's no agent to experience what's going on. The fear of death should be the fear of not having done enough when you were alive.
Yeah.
That is what we need to be looking at. It's that, again, switch of perspective that Stoicism constantly makes you do. Death is this thing. Now you have a choice to mold your perspective of it. I can either sit here in fear of how it's going to feel when I'm dead, or I can fear that now that I'm alive right now, I have this chance to do everything that I've ever desired.
Yeah, I think the scariest part of death isn't the death itself, but the moments prior when you're on your deathbed and you're thinking about, did I do what I wanted in life? Was there anything that I left? Like, are there any boxes I left unchecked?
Right.
And you don't want to die that way. You want to die feeling that you left everything on the table. You gave it your absolute all. You were the best person you could have been, achieved what you needed to achieve, and helped to fill lives around you with a sense of goodness. And if you do that to the highest degree, which is what Stoicism is helping to give you the tools to be able to do efficiently, um, you'll be able to die peacefully.
Yeah.
And I think that learning to die in peace is such a core element to philosophy and
It really
Stoicism.
is. And another thing which you lightly touched on there that I want to focus on is this the best that you can be. So a lot of the times we have this fear that our life wasn't enough because we didn't live up to what other people have done. Understand that we each have certain capabilities. We each have certain pluses, certain minuses, things we're good at, things we might not be as good at. But know that by the end of it, you've done the best you can with what the hand you were dealt. And that's when you can like just die peacefully, knowing that the gifts that I got by this biological chance, I maximize them. And that's what I think is what this is trying to tell us to do.
So that wraps up Seneca's first quote. Another quote that we're going to get into is by Epictetus, which states, "We cannot become insulted by the words thrown at us, for one of two situations are true. Either they are saying falsehoods, and lies should not have power over your emotions, or what they say has truth, in which case you should internalize the words and address the problem within ourselves."
And that's one of my favorite Epictetus quotes. So again, it's just honing in on that stoic practice of switching perspective. It's always within your power to switch the perspective of how you look at things. Events happen independent of us. How they affect us is completely dependent on our perspective of these events. So he says, when someone has thrown an insult at you, one of two situations will always be true. There's no other choice here. Someone has said something foul about you. So either they're saying falsehoods, whatever they said is just not true. Brandon, you're 5 foot tall. You're not. So why would Brandon be offended by being 5 foot tall? He's just simply not. Or the thing they said has some truth to it, in which case that means that's an opportunity for me to be better.
Yeah.
Someone says something negative about me, and I have now internalized this and see, there's truth to what they have said. I should now work on making me better by working on this thing that has been pointed out to me, even if that person meant for this to be an insult. It is your choice to take it as an insult or to take it as constructive. Take it as this person has thrown something at me, and I identify it as it being true, as having some truth, at least any semblance of truth at all. Now that's an opportunity for me to go and be like, nope, that's not an insult. That's constructive. And I'm going to go now back and work on that until that's no longer an issue.
I think we oftentimes live life in such a way where we are so consistently trying to protect our ego, and I think one of the wisest things that we can do in life is learning how to take constructive criticism with grace, even if it doesn't come off in the most respectful way. Take a moment and sit back. Did what that person say have validity to it? And if it does, don't be mad. Recognize that as a favor. Honestly, sometimes the people that have thrown harsh criticism at me
Yes.
has turned into the best transformations in my life.
How many successful people do you hear say my naysayers were my motivation? The
Exactly.
people who said that this isn't going to succeed, don't even try. They're the ones that's bulletin board material. That's what you put up in the room, and you're like, this person said this. So while that someone might have told, one that comes to mind, Aaron Rodgers recently said that one of his professors at California, the university he attended, told him he'd never be an NFL quarterback. He internalized that, and now he's like what, a three-time MVP, he's won a Super Bowl, widely considered one of the best quarterbacks of all time. Those types of situations, he could have sat there and said, oh, this person said this terrible thing of me, you know what, I'm going to quit, I'm going to stop playing quarterback here at Cal, I'm going to focus on my business degree and blah blah blah. But he didn't. He sat there, took that as motivation. His choice to switch perspective on what someone told him aided him in becoming the man he is today.
And say, even if at the time that that criticism was received, it was true, that doesn't mean it has to stay true.
Yes.
And I think that if someone says something of us, we get so afraid because it's now this permanent part of what makes us what we are. But recognize there is no stagnant you, there is no static you that exists, in that if it's just this flowing thing like a body of water, add whatever newness you want to it at any point you want to. You can always start anew in life, and you can always change at any point. And whatever may be true right now in this very second can be entirely different in the next. And we don't need to carry perpetually on with us these elements that we think are part that we label to our character.
Right.
We can at any point change.
And this reminds me of the Heraclitus quote: the only thing that is constant is change. Yeah. Nothing else is stagnant in the world except that nothing is stagnant.
Yes.
It's pretty crazy, super paradoxical, but the only thing that stays the same is that change is always happening.
Yeah.
So even if, like Brandon said, what someone told you at that moment is true, it doesn't have to be true tomorrow or the next day, and so on. It is now within your power to make this thing which you have identified as a negative part of your person to no longer be.
I think that you, like people that are addicts of certain things, you can apply that same mentality where if you've been smoking cigarettes all your life and on today you decide, you know what, I'm done, I quit, and you stop, you're no longer an addict if you quit. If you're done and you choose to never ever go back, holding on to that idea, that label to your character can be potentially dangerous to you and not help you feel like you
labels
move forward.
Are definitely, yeah, labels are one of the worst things that we can ever put on ourselves. Never let anyone say that you're this or that, because then that becomes part of you. Let things be descriptors, don't let them be titles. All these things that people have ascribed to you, they're things that are adjectives. They're a describer of you at this moment, but they don't have to describe you forever.
Correct.
So another one here for temperance is Marcus Aurelius. He says, when another blames you or hates you, or people voice similar criticism, go to their souls, penetrate inside, and see what sort of people they are. You will realize that there is no need to be racked with anxiety that they should hold any particular opinion of you.
So I think a great way to look at this quote is, everyone has had someone say something to them that was clearly fueled by anger, raging, jealousy, whatever it may be. Yeah. And then we have that moment in response where like we're equally fueled, and it's like, wait a second, look at what fueled what they said. Do they truly even mean those words to begin with? Mm-hmm. Oftentimes we may come to the conclusion that like they probably didn't. They were just speaking out in anger and this state of cloudedness from all that emotion. And I think that it doesn't make sense to allow such words to penetrate into our mind, and to, you know, and to accept those words as true or legitimate perceptions of who we are if they were fueled by things that are so out of alignment with logic.
Right. And I think I'm repeating myself, but it's because it's so important, because this is such a integral part of Stoicism is your ability to switch the perspective of the event that is unfolding in front of you. That is exactly what he's saying here again. Someone has said something bad of you. It is now your choice to flip that perspective, see where they're coming from. You can think that they're coming from some malicious point of view, but they're not always. And you may not know that. You may not know where their perspective's coming from, where their emotions are fueling this statement they're making about you, but it's your choice to stand with one of them. And within the Stoic teachings, it would make more sense to stand with the one that will bring you less negative. It is important to identify situations and possibilities to explain these situations by looking at the net positives and net negatives of them. If something is possible but it produces a net negative, then what is the point of me choosing to believe it? What is the point of me choosing to believe that there's malice in someone's heart towards me if I don't know that for certain? I am just holding a hypothetical that does nothing but bring me down. Why is it not better to choose that this individual may have had some emotional situation, something that is, maybe it's jealousy, maybe it's discomfort with who they are that has fueled this jealousy, and it's the reflection of almost self-perseverance that they're having there in order to make themselves not feel as bad as they think they do about themselves, is to bring another down. That completely might be untrue. This person may not be feeling any of that, but it is also just a hypothetical. And of the two, that one helps me more continue to have a higher state of mind, a more calmness, a more happiness, as opposed to believing that someone has genuine distaste and malice for me. So it is better for me to hold the scenario that doesn't do that. And that's part of that, again, choosing your perspective of the events that unfold in front of you.
In choosing that, we gain autonomy. Think about this for a moment. If I'm going about my day and I allow any person's negative words to penetrate into my mind and I believe it to be true, or I allow it to mess with my emotions, I am a puppet on the strings of the words anyone chooses to say at me at any time on any day. And the quality of my days bleed into the quality of my weeks, months, years, and decades of my life. And what a superpower to be able to be like, you know what, I have the capacity, I have developed and refined the ability to determine which words, whose words I allow to create some sort of emotional response in me,
Right.
and whose words don't. And being able to do that will help you just lead a better life.
It definitely is. That's one of the big ones there, is autonomy. It's not only words, but actions. Again, to go back to the guy cutting you off in traffic, if I'm mad and then I take that to work or take that home and have a bad day at work or have a bad day at home with my partner, or if you have kids or whatever, and you decide to now carry that negative emotion that this person has done, this person has now dictated how you act towards the people around you.
Yeah, that's a big one.
They have completely taken over you. You are no longer in control of you. You are just a character in a video game, and this person's punching in buttons on a controller and you're acting within accordance to it. As opposed to removing that, you say, no, you don't have power over me. The action which you took in cutting me off in traffic, that doesn't dictate how the rest of my day will go. I dictate how the rest of my day will go. And I will do that by applying whatever justification I need to give you for what you did, so that my day can go on smoothly.
I think another quick, if I'm to like insert something real fast there, is sometimes it's really useful to measure the importance of a particular event in relation to the rest of your day or the rest of your week or even life. So for instance, we're going to keep using the guy cutting you off scenario. Think of how angry you may have become sometimes. Like, some people's emotions go through the roof and they are just furious. If you take a moment and ask yourself, in the grand scheme of my week or even day, chances are 15 minutes from that point, if that, they won't even remember that happened. Right. Unless it were brought up to them, hey, did you get cut off today or something? Like, no. So why are you allowing yourself to get so emotionally frustrated and go to this extreme of emotion and be manipulated in such a way, if in the grand scheme of things this won't even be a memory anymore?
Yeah, this is just a thing that happened in passing that doesn't matter.
Yeah,
you are allowing it to matter by having this reaction to it.
Yeah, and so just in the same way as reflecting on the other person's emotional state and all of these circumstances that could help us be more acceptant of where they were coming from with what they did.
Mhm.
Another good tool to add in your tool belt for how to overcome these circumstances is take a moment to, you're waiting in line, you're stuck in line, or there's so much traffic and you're so upset. Like, in a day from now, you're not going to remember that. You're not going to be bothered by that. And the more that we could reduce those moments of that suffering, like bit by bit, our life just becomes more bright.
And I think that's taking that step back there in those situations, like you said, matters a lot. So I think a lot of people tend to have one of these situations happen again, using the guy cutting you off in traffic, and that is the like the wideness of the scope they're looking at it. It's this is the event, that is all that there is. But taking a step back and seeing this is happening within a day, it's happening within a week, it's happening within a month, it's happening within a year, a decade of my life. At what point did that little event not matter anymore? So having that ability to minimize the event helps you minimize the reaction you'll have towards it. So the next pillar that we're going to be going into is courage. And courage is defined by the Stoics as the state of the soul which is unmoved by fear, boldness and obedience to wisdom, being in, interpreted in the face of death, face of fortitude or respect of virtue.
So, the only true way that we can be courageous with anything that we do is having felt fear. If there's no fear, then you can't be courageous. We can only be courageous when we act, regardless of whether we were feeling fear or not. Um, that's what makes it a virtue, is because even in the face of such discomfort and something that tells you no, and that voice in your head that wants you to turn in the other direction, you persevered and you pushed onwards regardless of that. To tie into that, what I just said, there's a quote by Seneca that says, sometimes to even live is an act of courage. We all recognize that in life there are inevitable hardships that we are going to face in the near and long-term future.
Mm-hmm.
That friends and family are going to get sick. Everyone we know is eventually going to die. We're going to go through things that we didn't expect, big mistakes or whatever it may be. We lose our jobs. Who knows? There are so many things, the weather, so many things can happen that could totally throw a curveball in our lives that we didn't conceive of happening
Right.
or didn't expect. However, we choose to keep living. We choose to keep pushing on, regardless of the fact that there is unquantifiable suffering waiting for you in the future, that all of these horrible things are absolutely inevitable and are going to
Right.
happen, that you choose to keep living. And in the face of that, you chose to keep going.
Right. And I think this is a good one that when you're having a bad day, to remind yourself of this one. It's, I may be having a terrible day. Work might be going awful. I might have had a fight with someone who I care about and I don't like how that ended, whatever, whatever, whatever. You woke up this morning, you got out of bed, and you continue to live. You're courageous for that.
Yeah.
You are awesome for having had been able to do that. And that's just something that can pull you out of some really dark places sometimes. It's just, you're awesome for being here.
Yeah. I think that we could gloss over that and be like, okay, big whip. I got out of bed, or I did whatever. Life is crazy. I don't think that like people take enough time to like take a moment and reflect on like what is expected of us, how we have to operate. We have this body that can fail on us at any given moment. It's like we're teetering on the edge of some cliff back and forth. We don't know when we're going to be pushed over and when we're safe, but we hope and we try our best to be as safe as possible. But there's inevitabilities, there's things that are always going to happen. And um, reflecting on the fact that you chose to go about your day, you chose to go to work and do these things, that's courageous. And it may seem silly or small at first, but if you really see it in the big picture, that what went into that decision, it really is an act of courage.
So another quote we're going to go into here is another Seneca quote for courage, where he says, "We are more often frightened than hurt. We suffer more in imagination than reality."
Yeah, I think that quote encapsulates a lot of, for instance, we suffer more in imagination than reality, that it is only through our perception of particular things that are happening that deems them good or bad.
Right.
It has to first pass through this filtration process within our mind where we use thoughts to create a cohesive picture of what's going on. And it's only through whatever picture we happen to create, it's going to make our feelings act in accordance with that. So in reality, right, I may think of something and get myself into some anxiety about an issue that actually isn't even existing. That I could be thinking of all these could be's or whatever
Exactly.
potential happenings, and like their imaginations, their illusions, their what you're afraid of doesn't mean it's true. You believe it to be, and then you have a physiological reaction in accordance with that, a mental one, and then your body and mind are living as though this illusion, this imagination is a truth about reality. And that's just going to create a lot of suffering over something that what's happening out here super different than what's happening in here. What we should be striving to do is to, obviously this isn't like possible, but getting as close as we can to a 1-to-1 ratio with in alignment with what's out here and what's in here. And
Right.
the more that we're in alignment with what's out there, the more we can be in a state of peace.
Right. And to touch on where he says we are more often frightened than hurt. I think that's really important. It's that people often live in fear of failure, in fear of the possibility of the negative outcome being what happens, and that hinders them from ever actually putting any action to motion. So I think, for example, here, you may be frightened. Imagine you want to run a marathon, but you're frightened that you may tear your Achilles in doing so, and that stops you from running it. You are living in you're living frightened as opposed to hurt. You are in fear of the possibility of pain that you don't even know is real, and that has now stopped you from taking action to something you want to do. It's what he's saying here. It's going back again even to death, where you are living in fear of what the sensation of death will be, as opposed to knowing that it can't hurt you because you don't exist anymore. That anticipation of hurt holds so many of us back. That anticipation of failure, that anticipation of the thing that I'm setting out to do, I'm not going to do it because it might not go the way I want it to go, as opposed to saying, I'm going to do it anyways. And if it doesn't, then I move on to the next thing. And that serves as a learning experience. Never hold yourself back because you're fearful that the negative outcome is possible, because you need to continue to remind yourself the good outcome is just as possible. And even when the bad outcome might come, it doesn't have to be bad. Your choice of perspective again comes into play. I didn't fail. I had a situation where I learned what I can apply to the next one.
Exactly. I think in summary that like you only fail when you stop trying.
Yes.
And when we have things that were at one point undesirable that happen, it helps us get to the next goal within it, within what we want to do. So for instance, in making this podcast, hiccups along the way, we confront a hiccup that accelerates us further down the path of what we're trying to achieve,
Right.
because we learn more through those speed bumps. And it is only through there's this quote by Ryan Holiday, he's a modern Stoic right now, great uh, sharer of all this knowledge. He essentially says the obstacle is the way. He has a book, I believe, titled that. And it is only through these obstacles that we get to where we want to go. There is no challenge, there's no achievement that is, one, either rewarding, but two, possible without some sort of obstacles, some sort of
Yeah.
challenges that we need to overcome, where we find a greater version of ourselves, a sense of reward and accomplishment, and that through that process refines our abilities to do what we're trying to do even better. It is only through these hiccups and that we get better at this process.
Yeah.
And we can't be afraid of them. We can't try to look at these paths like this happened. It's unfortunate that this hiccup happened. No, it's fortunate that it happened, because you can take it on. There's this Marcus quote where he says that don't think it that it's unfortunate that an event happened to you. Think that it's fortunate that it did, because you have the capacity to bear it. You can
Yes.
take this challenge, move forward with it, and get closer and closer to whatever things that you want to achieve.
Yeah. And again, to touch on that frightened thing, is a lot of people at least seem to act with a their response to situations is to take the easiest road, and we need to remind ourselves that greatness doesn't come from taking the easiest road. The road that's harder, the things that put us in struggle, the things that put us under stress, that is where you create great things. That is the road you want to take. Don't live in fear of the struggle. Embrace the struggle. That is where you want to be. If you are constantly being smoothed out, you become nothing great comes of that. You want to be in situations where you're constantly being asked more of. You're constantly put under situations of stress, because that is how you succeed.
And that ties perfectly into our next quote by Viktor Frankl, where he says, what man actually needs is not a tensionless state, but rather the striving and struggling for some goal worthy of him. That people of greatness are not cultivated through easy tasks. They're not cultivated through a pressureless life. They're cultivated by putting themselves on the line, by putting themselves in situations where you're uncomfortable, where you confront the you that has anxiety, that maybe you're unsure of whether you can do this thing. You have to go through those trying things. It's like if you go to the gym and you're constantly lifting light weight and not testing yourself, you're never going to grow. You're never going to develop in the ways you want to. You
Right.
have to put yourself in those situations where you are tested.
Seek out the struggle. You want to continue to seek out the struggle. Just stop looking for, as he says here, a tensionless state. That doesn't lead to anything. You want to go out there and find a struggle that is worthy of you. Find a struggle that is going to make you good. And that, I think, is, again, having that ability to discern that we touched on earlier between pointless struggle and struggle with an end goal. So there might be situations where I'm struggling and I am under stress, but in reality, when I look at the big picture, it's stress that isn't doing anything to better me as a human. That's the type of stress where we got to step aside and say, hey, the Stoics taught that's I that shouldn't matter to me. Flip my perspective on that. That outside event is not going to cause stress, but the situations that we can identify that have an end goal, again, to touch on the gym analogy you used, it hurts. You are sore the next day.
Yeah.
When you're pushing for that last rep and you're going into failure, it hurts. But that struggle, that is worth something. You can identify the goal at the end of that. I am going through this suffering because it will become this thing that I want and that will make me better. And that's the suffering that you want to seek out.
Think of anything worth achieving in life. None of that comes easy. For instance, being a good friend. In order to be a good friend, you've got to confront uncomfortable situations, right? You have to be able to put yourself in situations where you have that uncomfortable conversation, where you take the constructive criticism, where you give the constructive criticism, where you have to learn how to make choices that sacrifices that may be uncomfortable, but you do it for the greater good of what it represents. To be intelligent, right? Reading or to be fit, we have to sweat and put ourselves in grueling situations. There is no element to the human condition that does not require being tested. And the more that we're tested in these circumstances, the better that we become.
Yeah, that reminds me of Alex Hermosi quote he said on his recent appearance on Chris Williamson's Modern Wisdom podcast, where he says that you always want to seek out the biggest dragon to slay. That is the most epic situation. That's what makes for the most epic story. That's what makes for you to become the better you. Is you're not looking for the easiest dragon to slay. You're not looking to go fight a lizard as opposed to the biggest fire breathing dragon you can find. Always seek out the hardest struggle, because that one will net you the biggest gain. That one will make you the better you. Seek out the biggest dragon. So, the fourth and final pillar of Stoicism that we're going to be going into here is justice. And the Stoics define it as the state that distributes to each person according to what is deserved, the state underlying a law abiding way of life, social equality, the state of obedience to the laws.
Justice is such an integral element to how we operate as people every single day. It is whatever framework of justice that you have in your mind is the quintessential part of you that determines how you treat those around you and how the things that you pursue, the ways that you even not just directly treat people, but the way you treat yourself in the world. And it has such a big part of determining how we operate and what makes us who we are.
Yeah. It's a reflection of our moral code, the things we find right. And this isn't part of it is definitely state instituted laws. So we're talking about legislature there, but a lot of this, I think, and more importantly, is the internal law. It's that internal sense and compass of morality that we have, that we need to identify and live our life in accordance with that sense of justice that we cultivate within ourselves.
Just to reiterate, all of these pillars are they exist on a fuck me hold on. Just to reiterate, all of these pillars operate on a spectrum, so a lot work together. For instance, like sometimes doing the right thing, justice, isn't easy. Sometimes it takes courage to do. Sometimes making those sacrifices is really difficult. Sometimes knowing when to apply what type of justice, that's part of wisdom. So
Yeah.
it's going to determine what we do in life and just how we're operating for sure.
Definitely. So, one of the first quotes that we're going to be going into is a Marcus Aurelius quote where he says, "Think on this doctrine. The reasoning beings were created for one another's sake, that to be patient is a branch of justice, and that men sin without intending it." And that's honestly, I think, one of the most totally encompassing quotes about what justice is, at least for my definition and my internal moral code, is that reasoning men, they were created for one another's sake. So a person that is within reason, that is within the capabilities of their mind, that is in complete control of their actions with no hindrance of um, illness or incapability, anything like that, he acts for one another's sake. We act for the betterment of each other, for the betterment of man. We every action we take is to help us, but also to help us as a species, as a group, as a society. Then he says that, and men who sin without, and that men sin without intending it, is that part that really resonates with me, that he is able to look at individuals and the actions they've taken and see that when they have acted with sin, in his words, or just say breaks the law, does something that we deem immoral, he is saying that is not one who is within reason. That is not a man of reason. It is he is not acting in for the sake of one another. There is something wrong there. And then he adds to that that patience is a branch of justice. He's telling us in order to have full justice, we need to be able to have patience with the individuals who are not holding beholden within reason, the ones that are committing sin without intending it, the ones whose situation has led them to commit these actions. And the role of us is not to demonize these individuals, to look at them as a stain on society, but rather to have patience, as that is what true justice is to have the patience and ability to understand what has caused this individual to act with this sin.
A practical way I think we can apply that quote is by, I'm sure we've all been there. We have someone do something awful to us, and we're just like, you know what? I hope something bad happens to them. We wish poorly for them. But isn't it the case that it is the person who had desirable experiences happen to them that made them into a good person, that helped to shine a light on maybe the right behaviors, on behaviors that wouldn't be in accordance with being malicious or being rude or whatever it may be, things, events that led them into justifying what they justified to us. So instead, we should wish only for the best for that person because it'll help them be better. It'll help them with the next people that they confront to treat them better.
Mm-hmm.
And it is only through those types of events in our lives and the reconstruction of our thoughts and how we justify decisions that we can be different, we can be better. And we need to find patience with those people. So whenever we confront people along those lines that like, are rude or impatient or whatever it may be patient with them and recognize they haven't gone through it yet to mold their character in a way that would be desirable. They haven't yet been exposed to elements that
Mm-hmm.
more uh, clearly refine their character in a way to give them more patience or kindness or whatever it may be. And in those moments, recognize, wait, I have that, we have that. And so be grateful that you had that opportunity, and if anything, feel pity for the person that hasn't, and only hope that they go through that too themselves, so that they can lead better lives, and treat others with more respect and dignity, or whatever it may be.
Definitely. And I think to touch on how you're saying that we often have this innate reaction to wish poorly on individuals who have done poorly onto us. Um, I would say that the Stoics would say, specifically with this pillar, the justful man, the one who is seeking justice, is the one who tries to end that cycle, that perpetual cycle of hurt, that perpetual cycle of creating pain within each other. That this person has done wrong unto me, so I wish wrong unto them, and then they will wish wrong unto someone else who will do it to someone else. It is the justful and ethical man who puts a stop to that cycle, because he is acting again, created for one another's sake. He is acting for a fellow man by stopping a cycle that is going to hurt us. He is stopping the cycle of I wish poorly upon you. He's saying you have wished poorly upon me based on situations that have happened to you. And based on the situations that have happened to me, I am able to identify that. And because of that, I now wish good upon you so that you may be better to the next.
I think the best way to also tie in a lot of what you just said there is that, I believe it's Gandhi quote, right? The whole "an eye for an eye makes the whole world blind."
Yes.
Recognize that you feel awful about what that person did. Why are you going to replicate it? You're no better. We have to learn to take a step back and be like, you know what? If I'm confronted with something which I don't respect and don't like, it is a responsibility of yours to do everything in your power to be the opposite. There's a quote by Marcus where he says, "The best revenge is to be unlike your enemy."
Yes.
And we should just perpetuate in such a disposition where we if we know what's right and we were wronged by something, don't perpetuate that wrong. Now you just have two wrongs in the world. Be the right and recognize what you need to change, and don't be in alignment with that.
And I think also here, most likely unintentionally so, it seems like Marcus alluded to our previous episode about free will. Here, he's understanding that the sin that a person commits is unintending. It's something that is a result of their situation. He may not have had explicit intent to say here this person didn't have the will to commit that action, but that's what he's saying here. That is what is being said. It's to have the wisdom to know that an individual acts within the confines of the situation they're born into, that they've been raised in, that they've been exposed to. And when we're able to have that ability to discern there, we then have the ability to react in a more ethical and justful way.
So another quote in Justice by Marcus Aurelius states, "If someone is able to show me that what I think or do is not right, I will happily change, for I seek the truth, by which no one was ever truly harmed. It is the person who continues in his self-deception and ignorance who is harmed." It is so important to not uh, enmesh your ideas and beliefs with your identity, because they become harder to detach from.
Right.
We have to, at any moment, allow ourselves to let go of any particular type of idea, because we need to carry ourselves with a grace that I could be wrong in anything I believe.
Yes.
This kind of ties into how we like to operate within this podcast, is we are open to being wrong about anything. But at the moment we believe it's true, we'll be operating as though it is true.
Right.
But are open and receptive to receiving any type of criticism that, if proves otherwise to any idea that which we or individually hold to be true, will change immediately, because to do otherwise would be illogical and would be the opposite of justice. And sometimes it to tie back to courageous, or courage, it does take that courage to be able to drop some old part of what we believe to be true, admit to being wrong, but also adopt some new truth about reality or yourself that which you didn't previously hold. That can be inherently uncomfortable. Adopting new ideas and removing old ones as true can be difficult, painful. It could feel odd, but it's necessary.
Yes. And I think a big part of this quote that I focus on, at least, is I will happily change, for I seek truth, by which no man was ever truly harmed. That is the end goal. That is the point of this whole trying to examine the space we live in is to reach truth. And when you hold ideas as part of you, you're no longer reaching truth. That's not your goal anymore. Your goal is to validate whatever you believe and you've now attached to yourself. Think of any idea. There's plenty of ideas out there that people and groups have deemed unquestionable because it's not allowed to question. And those are those areas where ignorance is fostered. It's fostered and perpetuated to the masses. And that's just some of the places where the continuance of human development is stunted at such an alarming and like just depressing rate, honestly, where we have moved from being truth seekers to being people who just want to validate what we already thought. He says, and he goes on to say, it is the person who continues in self deception and ignorance who is truly harmed. And that couldn't be more true. What can you possibly say that is worse for you than to continue to feed yourself a lie, to continue to feed the individuals around you that you care about a lie? You are just breeding more and more ignorance, which doesn't help anything or anyone. That is the highest level of self harm you can continue to do to yourself, is making believe that this truth isn't true because it'll hurt you if it's true, because it will remove a stance you had beforehand is true. That is the highest level of just the way that you can hurt yourself.
I think a habit people fall into is ascribing to particular ideas because they feel good to believe.
Yeah.
I think it is an extremely stoic approach to, regardless of whether a truth feels good or if it feels absolutely awful, that you have an internal law that I will stick to truth regardless of that feeling. It doesn't matter what it makes me feel like.
Mm.
What matters is that it's true. And acting in accordance with that will only help us prosper in life.
Yeah, and I think that ties back to one of the earlier quotes we touched on about seeking out purposeful struggle, seeking this
Yes.
out at all times. What we said earlier is identify what kind of struggle it is. If it holds an end goal which is profitable to the person, continue to seek out that struggle. And in this case, that end goal is truth. So while that truth may hurt and may put struggle and stress on you, notice that it is for the end goal of truth, truth by which no one was ever truly harmed. And that is the stuff you want to be in. That's what you want to continue to seek out.
Absolutely.
So the next quote we're going to touch on is again Marcus Aurelius. He says, whenever you are about to find a fault with someone, ask yourself the following question: what fault of my own most nearly resembles the one I am about to criticize? And that is again practicing humility, practicing patience within justice. That ability to say, slow yourself down before you pass judgment on others and say, this thing which this person is doing, I more than likely have it to some degree. So how can I judge another for something which I also do? It would make no sense. It helps with empathy. It helps you empathize with another person because you're not alone in this. This person did this bad. Maybe I just had it as a thought. Maybe I didn't act on it and they did. And that's the only thing that's separating me and this individual. But I can empathize with how their brain was working at the time and not pass judgment as if they're some monster.
Something I found so important in what you just said was slow down before you cast judgment.
Yes.
It's so important because we are all victims of getting super upset with someone who has done something that we have done before ourselves. It seems ironic to have such an issue with them if we can just take a moment and reflect on, what was the time that you did that thing? Did it not make sense in the time you did it? It felt reasonable to do it in the time you did it. Maybe it wasn't even an active thinking thing. It was an unconscious just behavior that happened that you got upset about, but that you've done before yourself. It helps you to be so much more acceptant and understanding of those people when we reflect on the fact that like everyone is going to make mistakes and do these things. And before we get so upset with them, recognize that even if we haven't done it ourselves before, we can still do it. We like, you may have never cut someone off before, but there is a time where you might in the future, you might just not see someone in your blind spot, or you might just, I don't know, be in a rush and you weren't even thinking, or maybe you're not in a rush, maybe you're just mentally really preoccupied and lost in the world of your own mind, and you go to merge and, oh, I didn't even realize, I didn't notice someone was there. How innocent of an action of that nature, and apply that to so many ways in which we can behave as people. And it helps you to be less caught up in expecting people to be acting in this really perfect way around us. um, the world isn't perfect, and we have to stop expecting it to be. We have to stop expecting the world to be this thing that revolves so perfectly around us, and instead expect that, like, things aren't going to go the right way. And that opens the doorway to the next quote, where Marcus says, begin each day by telling yourself that you shall be met with interference and ingratitude, insolence, disloyalty, ill will, and selfishness, all of them due to the offenders in ignorance of what is good or evil. So recognize that, like, there are going to be people in your path that haven't been exposed to ways of goodness that which you hold in high value.
Mm-hmm.
And that when you expect this, it allows you to be more forgiving of them, because they're no longer a surprise in your path. They're like, I expected you to be here. Hey, that's okay. Like, well, I'm going to work through this and
Right.
and exercise that patience.
I think there's just great wisdom in recognizing that each one of us are, in ways, this individual who is on a path, and we're all on different points on this path. And the sin, I suppose, for lack of a better word, that we run into in interaction is that we expect the person we're interacting with to be on the same exact point on their path as we are. And we have to be able to realize that not everyone is. Someone may be ahead and they might see something we're doing as incorrect because they've already learned it, much in the same as they might be behind and we're now recognizing, hey, I did that before too. Maybe you should do it this way because I've learned from that. And it's just super important to be able to recognize that not everyone is where you're at. Some people will be ahead, some people will be behind. And it's best to approach these types of interactions as an opportunity to learn from someone, because everyone will have something to offer, as opposed to, this person's doing something I don't like.
I think in many ways too, we have to, I'm going to harp on it again, remove this shell, this protective shell we have over our pride, so that we can more easily embrace the constructive criticisms of others, and to be okay with not being perfect, and to making these mistakes, and that some random person can cast judgment on us, and that we will automatically have this disposition where we're embracing of it, and we're like, I'm all ears, let me hear, please, I just want to be better. And if you just want to be better, you'll recognize that there's a lot of things you got to work on. And if someone brings attention to one of those, if you genuinely really are motivated to be better, you're going to want to grasp at any constructive criticism that you possibly can, so that you can just continually get better. Criticism from ourselves can be very biased, and it's extremely valuable to open our eyes and ears to hear criticisms from external sources.
Yeah, and I think also a really big thing to touch on here is that I can see how someone may lump all that we've said here under this justice bubble as an excuse for other people's actions, but that's not the case. It's not an excuse, it's an explanation. It's an attempt to understand. We're not excusing by saying that someone else did something bad. I might have also done that bad thing, so therefore it's okay. That's not what we're doing here.
Correct.
It's not, it's okay that we've both done something bad. It's, I understand where you were coming from when you did this thing, which is bad, because I have also been victim of the same.
And that understanding ties back to what we originally spoke about with Stoicism, which is aligning your thoughts in accordance with logic, so to reduce unnecessary suffering. A lot of the unnecessary suffering is coming from having that skewed perspective of that other person, and not understanding. And when you don't understand, you're frustrated because you expected them. No, you had to align with what I expected you to be in alignment with. You can't cut me off. No one can cut me off. But when you recognize that it's going to happen, and other people are just unaware and people's minds are elsewhere, become more acceptant of it.
Yeah.
It's not excusing the behavior, but you're recognizing it's coming from places where you can fully just understand, and that helps you to not be upset with it. I think it's with things that we don't understand that we have the most emotional just anger with. When things happen, it seems like this happened for no reason, we get really frustrated. But when we see the reasoning behind all the things that happen, there's almost this peace.
Yeah. And to touch on that thing you said earlier about the removal of pride, I think that is one of the hardest things to do here. But going back to one of the quotes that we did say here is the Marcus Aurelius quote, where he says, if someone is able to show me that what I think or what I do is not right, I will happily change. And um, if a Roman emperor was able to do that, if
Yeah.
a Roman emperor was able to say, anybody come and tell me if what I'm doing is wrong, and you can completely prove that, I am going to change. I will take the knee and say, yes, you're right. And if he was able to do that, all of us are.
Anyone can.
We can definitely sit here and say, hey, I'm wrong, and accept that. Remove that pride. If the pride of a Roman emperor wasn't big enough to admit wrongness, yours isn't either.
Correct.
So that wraps up all the four pillars of Stoicism. We went over wisdom, how wisdom is that ability to uh, know what things we should hold, what things are important, and where we should be able to
Apply that.
discern. Applying then goes into temperance, that ability to have discipline, to know when you're supposed to put the wisdom that you hold into action. We went into courage, that ability to do the things which scare us, the things which we have fear over, the things that we may hold some are holding us back, I suppose, um, to just jump in and do them, because without the courage to do, nothing is ever created. No success is ever brought about by sitting in fear of the possible negatives. We went into justice, and how a lot of justice isn't necessarily just what the law may say, but it's that internal moral compass that we each have to develop, and to be able to understand our fellow man, understand the individual that you're having these interactions with, because we're all different. We're all in different points in our path. We're all at different points in our lives. We all have different situations going on when we go back home, and having the ability to understand that is where true justice comes in. Justice is that understanding of your fellow man. And we've dived into what all of these things mean and how we can apply them in life, but there's more to this. So there is, as the Stoics say with everything, there is an excess to anything. There is an excess to even being too stoic. There are situations where we can find ourselves becoming this unapproachable, um, almost stone-faced stoic who can't discern which pillar he's supposed to use at that moment, because he's too worried of, I'm supposed to be wise right now, I'm supposed to be courageous. There's a balancing act to be played.
I think to interject something really fast, I think a very, very common misconception about Stoicism is that you're not supposed to feel emotion. To clarify, it's not about not feeling emotion. It's about recognizing when this emotion has presented itself in excess and to dial that back.
Yes.
Yeah, that's just a part of that.
It's the ability to control your emotion, not remove.
Correct.
So it's the ability to know what kind, what amount, how can I show it, all these different aspects of emotion, and knowing when is the best part and place to use them. That is what Stoicism is. It is not becoming this, like I said earlier, stone-faced individual that shows no emotion. That is that excess. That is that vice end of Stoicism, where we become completely unapproachable human beings. We have to have that wisdom to go back into it, to know when and where we apply what parts of this.
Yeah. And we truly hope that you find that we did a good job of conveying this concept that is so important to us. This is kind of like a blueprint of how we choose to operate in life, and it helps us to lead a good life. It's something that is so all encompassing, and we hope you find the same value in it as you notice these day-to-day changes subtly, as you're like, you know what, things aren't bothering me as much anymore. I'm feeling more at peace. I'm striving for things that I'm truly passionate about. I'm less afraid to take chances. it's such an all-encompassing concept,
Yeah.
and it's so unbelievably invaluable. And yeah, we hope to leave you with these things of value that we absolutely love.
Before we do log out of here, I want to add that we did our best here to explain this, but this is a hill of a huge mountain, a huge
Yeah.
mountain range, if anything. So I know Brandon and I earlier today were speaking about a new copy of meditation that he found that he finds to be very approachable for individuals. So we'll link that one down in the description if anybody
Yes.
wants to pick this up and just take a deeper dive. It's an awesome concept, a concept that's honestly changed my life. It's changed yours, and
100%.
it's something that I think any individual can benefit from trying.
Absolutely.
So on that note, thank you, and we'll see you guys next time.
Bye.